Archaeologists just found a hunting structure at the bottom of Lake Huron that shouldn't exist. Not because it's too old, though 13,000 years is pretty wild, but because finding it means humans were doing something way more sophisticated than we thought possible at the end of the last ice age. We're talking coordinated hunting strategies, permanent structures, and evidence of social complexity that rewrites the textbooks. So what did they find down there? And why is this discovery making archaeologists lose their minds? Let's dive in. First, let's set the scene. Lake Huron, one of the 5 Great Lakes. Most people think of it as, well, a lake. But here's what they don't tell you. The Great Lakes weren't always lakes. Around 13,000 years ago, these weren't massive bodies of water. They were land, dry land. The glaciers had locked up so much of the world's water that sea levels were 300 feet lower than today. What's now underwater was once forests, grasslands, and hunting grounds. The Alpena Amberley Ridge. That's the name of the area we're talking about. Today it's 120 feet underwater in Lake Huron. It was a land bridge connecting what's now Michigan to what's now Ontario. And it wasn't just any land. It was prime real estate for ancient hunters. Why? Because it was a natural corridor for caribou migration. Caribou. Think of them as the Ice Age equivalent of the buffalo for plains tribes. Massive herds, thousands of animals, migrating in predictable patterns. Caribou weren't just food. They were everything. Meat for eating, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, sinew for thread. A successful caribou hunt could sustain a group for months. Miss the migration, and you're in trouble. Now, hunting caribou isn't easy. They're fast, they travel in huge groups, and they're skittish. One wrong move and the whole herd bolts. You can't just run up and stab one with a spear. You need strategy. You need coordination. And apparently, 13,000 years ago, humans in the Great Lakes region had figured this out. In 2007, a team of archaeologists using underwater remote sensing technology started mapping the bottom of Lake Huron. They were looking for anything unusual, any features that didn't belong. What they found was remarkable. Linear rock formations, arranged in patterns. Not random, not natural, deliberate. These weren't just piles of rocks. They were structures, hunting blinds, drive lanes, and what archaeologists call a kill zone. Imagine this. You're a caribou, migrating along this ridge with your herd. The terrain funnels you into a narrower path. There are rock walls. Not huge walls, but enough to guide your movement. You're being herded without realizing it. Up ahead, hunters are hiding behind rock blinds. You can't see them. You can't smell them because they're downwind. And then, at the perfect moment, they strike. Archaeologists had seen these before in places like Montana and Alberta, but those were on land and much more recent. Preserved for 13,000 years. That's unprecedented. Why? Because it means these weren't spontaneous hunts. This was engineered. Someone designed this system. Someone organized the labor to build it. Someone coordinated the hunts that used it. Let's talk about what that actually means. Building a drive lane system isn't a one-person job. You need multiple people working together. Someone has to scout the caribou migration routes and figure out where they're going. Someone has to identify the best ambush location. Someone has to gather rocks, lots of rocks, and pile them in specific configurations. This takes days, maybe weeks of work, and it requires planning for decades. Archaeologists assumed that humans at the end of the Ice Age were living in small, nomadic bands, hunter-gatherers who followed the game living hand-to-mouth, with minimal social organization. The assumption was that complex societies, the kind with specialized roles and permanent structures, didn't develop until agriculture came along, thousands of years later. This discovery destroys that assumption. You can't build something like this without social complexity. You need leadership. Someone has to coordinate the effort. You need cooperation. You need trust. People have to believe that their effort will pay off, that the system will work, that the caribou will actually show up. And here's the thing. If they built one of these structures, they probably built more. The Alpena Amberley Ridge is 9 miles long underwater. The team has only surveyed a fraction of it. They've already found multiple stone structures in different locations. Each one represents a separate hunting site, a different strategy for a different part of the ridge. This wasn't a one-off. This was a system. The dating is rock solid, pun intended. They used a combination of methods. First, they dated organic material found near the structures. Charcoal from ancient campfires, plant remains, anything that can be carbon-14 dated. All of it pointed to the same time period, give or take a few centuries. Second, they looked at the geological context. When did the glaciers retreat? When did the lake levels rise and submerge the ridge? The timeline matched perfectly. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This discovery connects to something else. The peopling of the Americas. How and when did humans first arrive in North America? The old theory was the Clovis first model. Clovis people, named after distinctive spear points found in Clovis, New Mexico, were thought to be the first Americans. They supposedly arrived around 13,000 years ago, crossing the Bering Land Bridge from Asia. Except that theory has been falling apart for years. We keep finding evidence of humans in the Americas before the Clovis people. Sites in South America, dated to 14,000 years ago. Sites in Texas and Florida, with even older dates. The Clovis first model doesn't work anymore. Humans were here earlier, and they were more widespread than we thought. The Alpena-Amberley Ridge discovery adds to this picture. They were established. They knew the land, they knew the caribou migration patterns well enough to build permanent hunting infrastructure. That takes time. That takes generations of knowledge passed down. So who were they? We don't know their name. They didn't leave written records, obviously, but we can infer things from what they left behind. They were skilled engineers. The rock formations show an understanding of animal behavior and landscape use. They were organized. Building these structures required planning and cooperation. They were successful. You don't invest that much effort into hunting infrastructure unless it works. The tools found near the sites give us more clues. Spear points, scrapers for processing hides, stone blades for butchering. The design of the spear points is interesting. They're similar to styles found across the Great Lakes region, but with some unique characteristics. This suggests a distinct cultural group, people who had their own traditions and technologies. Now, let's talk about what happened to these people. The glaciers melted faster. Water levels rose. This dry land corridor that had been so productive for hunting started flooding. First slowly, then more rapidly. The caribou migration routes changed as the landscape transformed. The hunting structures that had worked for centuries became useless. The people had to adapt or leave. Some probably moved north, following the caribou as they shifted to colder regions. Some probably moved south, looking for new food sources. Some might have stayed in the area but switched to fishing and hunting different animals as the lakes formed. The archaeological record gets murky here. We don't have good sites from this transition period, but we know that when the lakes stabilized a few thousand years later, there were people living around them, fishing, hunting, building different kinds of societies. The underwater preservation is what makes this discovery so valuable. On land, 13,000-year-old sites are incredibly rare. Plant growth, all of it destroys evidence over time. Things get preserved. The cold water, the low oxygen environment, the lack of disturbance. It all helps. Those rock structures look almost like they were built yesterday. You can see the individual stones, the gaps between them, the layout of the whole system. The team used some incredible technology to map all this. Side-scan sonar that creates detailed images of the lake bottom. Remotely operated vehicles with cameras that can get up close to the structures. And when they needed to, human divers going down to examine things in person. Diving in Lake Huron at 120 feet isn't easy. Visibility can be poor, and you're working against time limits because of decompression requirements. But the data they collected is phenomenal. One of the most striking things they found was what they call a hunting blind. It's a circular arrangement of stones, about 6 feet across, with an opening facing the drive lane. A hunter would crouch behind this, hidden from approaching caribou, and wait. When the caribou came through the funnel, created by the drive lanes, the hunter would have a clear shot. It's genius, really. Simple but incredibly effective. They found evidence of repeated use at these sites. Layers of material that suggest people came back year after year. That makes sense. If you've got a good hunting spot, you use it every migration season. maybe improve them based on what worked and what didn't. Over time, these sites become traditional hunting grounds, places with cultural significance. This raises questions about territory and conflict. If these hunting sites were so valuable, were they defended? Did different groups compete for access? We don't have direct evidence of conflict at these sites, but it's worth considering. Competition over resources is a human universal. Prime hunting grounds would have been worth fighting over. The discovery also tells us about Ice Age climate and environment. The fact that caribou were migrating through this corridor gives us information about vegetation patterns and temperature. Caribou need specific types of plants, lichen, mosses, grasses. The presence of large caribou herds means this was tundra or boreal forest environment. Cold, but productive enough to support big herbivores. Scientists can use this information to refine climate models for the end of the Ice Age. It's not just about archaeology. It's about understanding how the climate changed, how quickly, and how it affected both humans and animals. These questions are more relevant than ever as we deal with modern climate change. Let's talk about the implications for how we teach history. Most textbooks still present human development as a linear progression. Simple hunter-gatherers who lived in small groups, then agriculture, then cities, then civilization. This discovery, along with others like it, shows that's too simplistic. Humans 13,000 years ago were capable of complex planning, engineering, and social organization. They weren't primitive. They were sophisticated, just in different ways than we are. There's also a cultural dimension here. Modern Native American tribes in the Great Lakes region have oral traditions about their ancestors. Stories passed down for generations. Some of these stories mention a time when the lakes were different, when the land was dry, when huge herds of animals roamed. For a long time, anthropologists dismissed these as myths. But discoveries like the Alpena-Amberley Ridge structures suggest these oral traditions contain real historical memory. People remembered, and they passed that memory down through stories. The collaboration between archaeologists and tribal nations has been crucial for this research, about how their ancestors lived. Combining that knowledge with scientific methods produces better archaeology. It's also more ethical. These are the descendants of the people who built these structures. They have a stake in how the research is done and what conclusions are drawn. Now, here's where this gets really wild. The Alpena-Amberley Ridge isn't the only underwater archaeological site in the Great Lakes. As technology improves and more surveying happens, researchers are finding more sites, campsites, tool-making locations, possible ceremonial sites. The Great Lakes are essentially a time capsule of Ice Age human activity. We've barely scratched the surface. Think about what else might be down there. Stone tools, pottery from later periods, maybe even preserved organic materials like wooden spears or fiber cordage. In most archaeological sites, organic materials decay. They can survive. Imagine finding a 13,000-year-old wooden artifact. The information we could get from that would be incredible. The challenge is funding and resources. Underwater archaeology is expensive. You need boats, sonar equipment, diving gear, trained personnel, conservation facilities for artifacts. It's not like land archaeology where you can dig with a trowel and a screen. Every dive costs money. Every hour of sonar survey time costs money. Getting grants for this research is competitive, but the potential payoff is enormous. We could rewrite our understanding of how humans colonized North America, how they adapted to changing climates, how they developed complex societies. This isn't just academic navel-gazing. Understanding how past humans dealt with massive environmental change has lessons for us today. There's also the question of what to do with these sites. Do you leave them underwater, protected but inaccessible to most people? Do you try to create underwater parks where divers can visit? Do you raise some artifacts for museum display? Each option has pros and cons. Preservation is the priority, but public education matters too. People need to understand what's been found and why it's important. Some researchers are pushing for the Great Lakes underwater sites to be designated as protected archaeological zones. This would prevent things like anchor damage from boats or unauthorized artifact collecting. Yes, people dive down and take stuff. It's illegal, but it happens. Every artifact removed from context is information lost forever. We need protection for these sites. The technology for exploring underwater sites keeps improving. 3D modeling, remote sensing that can see through sediment. We'll probably discover dozens more Ice Age sites in the Great Lakes. Each one will add pieces to the puzzle of how humans lived, how they thought, how they survived in a world that was constantly changing. Here's something else to consider. The end of the Ice Age wasn't gradual. It was punctuated by dramatic events. Sudden floods when ice dams broke, climate oscillations that could happen within a human lifetime. They watched their world transform. Some of them probably remembered when the ridge started flooding, when the caribou stopped coming, when everything they knew changed. That's not just archaeology. That's human drama. Real people dealing with catastrophe, having to adapt or die. And they adapted. Their descendants are still here. That's a story worth telling. The Alpena Amberley Ridge discovery is one of those rare finds that makes you rethink everything. It's not just a cool artifact. It's evidence that rewrites our understanding of human capability, figured out how to work with it, and built something that worked for centuries. And now, 13,000 years later, we're finding what they left behind and learning from it. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Separated by over 400 generations, and we can still read their story in the stones they arranged at the bottom of a lake. Thanks for watching. More videos on recent discoveries coming soon. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss them.